The first time Margaret Hensley heard the screaming from across the hollow, it was barely past dusk, and she assumed it was a fox. That's what they always said around here. Anything you couldn't explain at night, fox. The scream had come in 3 distinct bursts, a long, human-like wail rising and cracking near the end like someone choking on their own voice. It had cut through the fog rolling in off the Renthorpe moor, past the dead hedgerows and the broken wall that ran from her farm to the old Mercer place. Margaret stood on her back porch with a mug of tea, watching as the trees swayed under a moonless sky. The orchard was bare, wind-torn. Not even the crows were nesting in the branches anymore. Something wasn't right. By morning they found the Mercer's dog impaled on the wrought-iron gate, at least what was left of it. Mr. Eves, the postman, said it looked like it had fallen from a great height. Body split open down the middle like a deer carcass. The police came up from Dewsbury. They walked around with flashlights, took statements, and told the villagers to lock their sheds and keep an eye out. But that night, Ellie Mercer didn't come home. She'd been last seen walking down the lane from the grocer with a string bag of eggs and onions. Her mother, an old midwife who barely spoke anymore, reported her missing the next day. The bag had been found dropped on the mossy trail that led toward the hollow's edge. The eggs were crushed, but not stepped on. No footprints in the mud, no signs of a struggle, just the bag and the crows. Hundreds of them perched in absolute silence on every line, every post and every tree limb within sight of the trail. The villagers took it as an omen, but nobody said so aloud. Ellie was the third in 2 years to vanish. Before her it had been young Jacob Langford in 76, last seen wandering into the woods behind the quarry to chase a rabbit, and before that, the Elliston twins. Both of them had gone off the beaten path while picking mushrooms for their nan and never came back. All 3 of the disappearances shared one detail. They happened within the triangle. Locals called it the Renthorpe Hollow, but it was more than a hollow. It was a depression of land surrounded by 3 thick woods. Ebonshaw to the north, Bracken Hollow to the east, and the old Hangman's Trail to the south. The trees in that area grew wrong, bent inward as if bowing to something beneath the ground. There were stories, always had been, and Margaret had grown up hearing them all. As a girl, she was warned never to go near the hollow. Her gran had once slapped her for even asking what was beyond the boundary trees. The stories went back to the 1800s, stories of a stone circle that had been pulled down and buried. Stories of a masked figure seen in the fog, walking between the trees with no footsteps in the snow. Some of those stories had names. Some were just shadows, but one name stuck with Margaret like a stone in the throat. The Crowsman. The name had surfaced again the day after Ellie vanished. Margaret had gone to see Father Willard, the local vicar, who kept his own journal of strange occurrences. He was one of the last people in the village who believed in the old tales, and he kept the church locked every night without fail. I dreamed of the crows again, he told her, trembling. This time they had human eyes. Margaret didn't laugh. She'd seen the black shapes too, lingering just beyond her fields, always just watching. Willard opened a drawer and took out an old journal, yellow with age, brittle like a pressed flower. This belonged to Thomas Pelham, he said, the original pastor here. Look at this. He opened the book to a page dated 1883. The writing was cramped and anxious. Another boy gone. They say he saw the Crowsman at dusk, just before the fog rolled in. The villagers say we're cursed, but it's not a curse. It's a pattern. Every 7 years, every 3rd new moon after the autumn equinox, and always after the crows come. Margaret stared at the page. It didn't feel like a fable anymore. Every 7 years, she murmured. Willard nodded. Ellie disappeared on October 13th, he said. That's exactly 7 years to the day after Jacob Langford. The next night, Margaret did something she hadn't done in 20 years. She crossed the field past her own orchard, through the frost-covered thickets, and entered Renthorpe Hollow. The boundary was marked by an old stile of stone, now cracked and overgrown. As soon as she stepped over it, the air grew colder. Still, like the woods were holding their breath. She held up her lantern. The path wound downward like a spiral, deeper into the trees. Somewhere far off, an owl called once, then fell silent. That's when she saw the footprints. Not hers, not a child's, but large, sunken impressions in the soft moss, almost human but too wide. 3 toes, no heel. She followed them. They led her to the old dry well in the centre of the hollow. At its base, tied to the stones with a red ribbon, was a scrap of Ellie Mercer's dress. And beside it, burned into the earth like a brand, was the symbol. A circle of crows drawn in ash. Inside it, a single white feather, still warm. Margaret didn't sleep that night. She sat at her kitchen table, lantern still glowing beside her, staring at the feather she had brought back from the hollow. White, pristine, almost luminous, yet it felt wrong in her hand. Like it vibrated faintly when she touched it, like it pulsed with a breath not her own. She'd spent 20 minutes scrubbing the ash symbol from her palm where she'd accidentally smeared it. But even as she looked down, she could still faintly see it, almost like it was under her skin, not on it. Outside, the wind rose in low, angry waves. The orchard trees moaned like animals in pain. A single knock echoed on the window. She turned her head. There, on the sill, sat a crow. Then another and another. Soon the entire window was covered in them, beaks tapping, feathers fluttering, silent except for the dull scrape of talons on glass. She screamed. When she looked again, they were gone. The next morning, she took the feather to Father Willard. He didn't touch it. Instead, he went to the back of the vestry and pulled down a leather-bound book older than the church itself. On its spine were 3 faded symbols, a bird, a mask, and a crooked cross. "This is from the Renthorpe archives," he said, carefully opening the book. "Most of it's gibberish, recorded by a madman during the witch trials. But look." He turned to a page with an illustration burned into the parchment with soot. It was the same symbol Margaret had seen in the hollow. "A ring of crows," she whispered. Willard nodded. "And in the middle, white feather. The Puritans called it Mark of the Hollow King, but the locals later twisted it into folklore. They called him the Crowsman." Margaret's throat was dry. "What did he do?" Willard read aloud. "He comes at the thinnest veil, walks between fog and flesh. 3 calls, 3 vanishings. When the circle is fed, the eye opens, and through it he wears a face." "Wears a face?" Margaret asked. Willard closed the book with a grim expression. "The stories say he takes the shape of someone who was lost, or someone you've lost. That's how he comes close. That's how he draws you in." Margaret shivered. Ellie was still missing, and something told her the girl wasn't far, but wasn't herself anymore. Later that day, Margaret visited the Mercers' property. She hadn't spoken much to Alice Mercer, Ellie's mother, since the girl vanished. Alice hadn't been seen outside the house for a week. Her curtains remained shut even during the day, and people whispered about sobbing heard at all hours. Margaret knocked. The door opened. Alice stood there like a ghost, her face hollow, lips pale, eyes rimmed with purple. "Have you seen her?" she asked in a voice barely audible. Margaret hesitated. "I think I've found something. In the hollow, it was." "She's in the trees," Alice whispered. Margaret stopped. "What?" "Every night I hear her calling. It's her voice, Maggie, but not her words. She says things Ellie never would. She sings in backwards rhymes. Last night she told me not to look under the floorboards." Margaret's stomach turned. "She's not dead, Maggie," Alice said. "She's becoming." Before Margaret could respond, Alice slammed the door shut. That night, Margaret sat with her shotgun. The crows had returned, this time perching in rows on the barn roof, the porch rail, the clothesline. Just watching. Around 3 a.m., the fog began to creep across the field. She could hear whispering. It sounded like Ellie. Then like her brother James, who had died during the war. Then like her gran. Voices she hadn't heard in decades, all calling her name from the trees. "Maggie, Maggie, come see us." She raised the gun, but her hands were shaking too hard to aim. Then she saw the figure. At the edge of the orchard, tall, thin, head slightly cocked. Its face was blurred, like smudged oil on glass. A crow sat on its shoulder. It raised one hand and beckoned. Then it turned and walked toward the hollow. At dawn, Margaret went to the authorities. They laughed her out of the station. "No prints, no body, no suspect. We can't do anything," said Constable Hales. She slammed the ash symbol on the table. He sighed. "Ma'am, this is Yorkshire, not Transylvania. You're wasting time." Outside, a black feather drifted down and landed on his car. It was still warm. She found her old journal later that day. Back when she was 15, Margaret and her childhood friend Colin had snuck into the hollow on a dare, She'd forgotten the details, but the journal brought them back in vivid detail. August 19th, 1961, Colin dared me to touch the stones at the centre. I did. I remember them feeling cold even though the sun was beating down. I touched the one with the crow carved into it. That night I dreamt of a man in a bird mask watching me from the trees. I didn't tell anyone. But she remembered now. And she remembered what happened to Colin 2 months later. He disappeared. The police thought he ran away, but she remembered the scream in the woods that night. Just like Ellie's, just like the others. Margaret returned to the Hollow the next evening. She carried salt in her pocket, a Bible in her coat, and a lantern freshly lit. The fog was already rising. Each step forward felt heavier, like the ground itself wanted her to stay back. Then she heard it. Help! Ellie's voice. Or something like it. It was coming from the well. She ran. When she reached the rim, she looked down. Inside the darkness, 2 glowing eyes stared back. They were not human, but they wore Ellie's face like a veil. A crow fluttered up from the mouth of the well, dropping a locket. Inside it, Margaret's own picture from her school days, scratched with a symbol across her eyes, the ring of crows. Suddenly the ground shook. The trees bent backward like they were gasping. A deep groan came from the earth itself, and in it, Margaret heard hundreds of whispering voices, one louder than the rest. The crowsmen. 3 taken. The circle fed. 1 must remain, to remember. She turned and ran. Branches tore her sleeves, the fog blinding her, roots grabbing her ankles. Something chased her, silent but heavy, its breath in her ear. She burst from the hollow and collapsed in her orchard, eyes wild, dress torn. The crows scattered, and the whispering stopped. Morning broke with the silence of snowfall, though the sky was clear and blue. Margaret lay in the orchard grass for what felt like hours, listening to the breeze, half expecting it to whisper her name again. It didn't. But the locket in her hand was still warm. Back in the house, she lit the stove and sat in front of it, cradling a mug of tea that went cold untouched. Her clothes were torn and her feet blistered from the run, but none of that seemed to matter anymore. She kept hearing Ellie's voice, not in the wind now, but in her own head, replaying the echo from the well. Help, help me, please. And that face, those eyes in the dark. It had her face, but the expression behind it wasn't Ellie's. It was too calm, too calculating, almost amused. Margaret opened the Bible beside her and slipped the locket inside. She needed to speak with Alice again. The Mercer property was unusually still. The front door was open a crack, and the porch had fresh scratches on the wood, parallel claw marks like a large bird had paced there. Margaret stepped inside. Alice? No answer. The house smelled of mildew and candle wax. Curtains drawn, dishes stacked in the sink, something sticky on the floor. She moved toward the kitchen, where the smell was strongest, and stopped. Alice was standing in the corner, barefoot, hair wild, facing the wall. Alice? The woman turned around slowly. Her eyes were bloodshot, her nightgown torn at the hem. She came to me last night, Alice said in a voice that barely resembled her own. Margaret swallowed. Alice nodded. She said I don't have to cry anymore. She said it's better down there. No sickness, no grief, just the trees. They remember everything. Her voice cracked. Margaret took a step closer. Alice, come with me. We can go into town, talk to. But Alice began humming, a low, lilting tune that wasn't a lullaby, but something older, almost tribal. And as she hummed, she walked backward out of the kitchen into the hall. Margaret followed. They reached the back room, the cellar entrance. Alice turned and looked at her one last time. She says you can't stop it, she whispered, but she says you'll try. Then she opened the door and descended into the darkness. Margaret waited. 5 seconds. 10. Then there was a scream, not human, and it ended as fast as it started. She never saw Alice again. Back home, Margaret tried to reach Father Willard. The church was locked. His car was gone. The last anyone had seen of him was 2 nights ago, heading toward the old rectory, carrying that cursed book under his arm. She went to the church graveyard. Near the oldest headstones, where the grass was dead and the crows seemed to hover, she found something new. A white feather nailed to a tree. Below it, scratched in bark, 3 taken, 1 to speak. The message from the hollow. Her knees gave out. That night she slept in shifts, the shotgun beside her, the lantern on, and then it happened. The back door creaked open, not burst, just creaked. A soft shuffling of bare feet on wood. Then, Maggie, she froze. It was her brother's voice. James, the same warm baritone from childhood, from letters home from the war. Maggie, you awake? She didn't answer. Maggie, they lied to you. I didn't die in France. I'm here. I came back. Her mouth went dry, and then he began to cry. Not soft tears, but guttural, painful sobs, the kind she remembered from the telegram day. Her hand trembled toward the shotgun. Then the voice stopped. Footsteps again, closer. She stood, slowly, raised the gun, and stepped into the hall. No one there, except the floor was wet. Not with blood, with dirt. Wet black soil, like something had been growing in the floorboards. In the morning, she went back to the hollow. She had to know. Had to understand what the circle wanted. This time, she didn't stop at the well. She walked deeper, past the ring of crow stones to where the trees grew in spirals. And there she found the ruins. Old foundation stones from a building long collapsed, moss-covered timbers, long rotted through. It had once been a church. No record of it existed in town. No map showed it. But she remembered Father Willard's book had mentioned Renthorpe's first chapel, burned in the trial fires. This was it. She stepped inside the ruined walls. Suddenly the forest noise dropped. No birds, no insects, just her breath. Then a whisper. Maggie? She turned. No one. Again. Maggie. It was Ellie this time, louder. Then Alice's voice joined her. Then James, all speaking at once, a chorus. Maggie, come to us. Maggie, stay. Maggie, we remember you. Maggie, don't forget us. Don't forget the hollow. Don't forget the circle. Then the earth cracked. A sinkhole opened at the centre of the ruins, slow and wide, swallowing roots and rock alike. From it rose the figure, not entirely human, but wearing her brother's face again. Its eyes were black, but in them she saw things. The trial fires, women bound to stakes, children in cages made of ash wood, and the crows. Always the crows, circling above, watching, waiting. The figure raised one hand and the forest shivered. 3 taken, it said, 1 to speak. Margaret's mouth trembled. What do you want from me? Memory, witness, voice. Its form shimmered. Now it was Ellie's face. Tell them. Then the figure melted back into the earth, and the ground closed behind it. Margaret ran. This time she didn't stop. She ran all the way back to town, straight into the radio station where her old friend Pete worked the night shift. She demanded airtime. He thought she was mad. But she sat down at the mic and said, "My name is Margaret Vale. I live outside Renthorpe Hollow. If you're hearing this, you need to understand. Something is alive in the woods. It remembers, and it feeds on those we forget. Listen carefully because you may be next. You may be the 4th. Pete cut the feed, told her to go home. But later that night, he saw a crow sitting in the booth, staring at him with his own eyes. 3 days passed after the broadcast. Pete Green quit his job at the station the very next morning. He didn't give notice, didn't pack up, just vanished. When the owner of Ren 89.4 FM came in later that week, he found the booth door open and a long black feather resting on the control board, stuck through a folded page torn from the phone book. Only one name was circled, Margaret Vale. The feather was still wet with something dark. Margaret didn't leave her house anymore. She had taken to writing everything down, dates, times, events. She kept 3 notebooks open at all times. Labelled, voices, appearances, patterns. She drew the well, the crow stones, the ruined chapel, the faces she'd seen, and the forest spiralling roots, which she now believed weren't just growing but converging on something. A centre, an eye. She wasn't eating much. Her hair had greyed at the temples. Her voice, once strong and precise, now had the brittle edge of someone perpetually at the edge of a scream. But she was focused, and she knew the signs were worsening. The whispers didn't only come at night now. They came in broad daylight, during radio static, from the trees, from puddles, from reflections in her window pane. She saw James again, standing behind her barn. This time, he wasn't weeping. He was smiling. And he was flanked by Alice and Ellie, both barefoot, both holding dried, hollow eggs in their hands. Their eyes were gone, pecked out, but they still stared. Margaret locked herself inside and wrote a final letter to Father Willard, even though she didn't know if he was still alive. "The circle knows I saw it," she wrote, "and now it watches me. I think it wants me to speak again. But this time, not just on radio. This time it wants a story told, one the world won't forget, because that's how it survives, through memory, through witnesses. And if I don't speak, it will find another and another, until someone does." She mailed the letter the next morning. The post office clerk, an elderly woman named Doris, found it on the counter long after closing. She didn't remember seeing Margaret that day. But the envelope was damp, like it had been pulled from a shallow grave. The next night, something new appeared in the sky over Renthorpe. A single black shape, hovering just above the old watchtower that overlooked the hollow. A crumbling brick relic from the 1800s that had once been a fire lookout, later abandoned after a lightning strike split the main staircase. Nobody went up there anymore, but the black shape remained. People in town began talking again. At the diner, at the hardware store, in hushed tones. "Did you see it? Looks like a man with wings." I swear to God it looked down at me. I heard it whisper. A hunter claimed he saw glowing eyes up there, like coals, only blinking. A teenager took a Polaroid of it one dusk from the field below. The photo came out blank, except for one detail. The watchtower was gone, not just empty. Gone. But the Polaroid was stamped with a date, July 13th, 1884. Margaret went up to the tower that night. She knew the steps were unsafe. Half the spiral was missing. She climbed anyway, hands shaking, flashlight clipped to her jacket. As she ascended, she saw scratches on the bricks, names carved in frenzied, looping hand. Sarah Conley, 1787. Rebecca Lane, 1803. Thomas Vale, 1861. Her own surname. She stopped there, hand hovering. Then below it, Margaret Vale, 2025. Fresh, just carved. The flashlight flickered. She kept climbing. The top floor was caved in. A single wooden chair stood in the centre, facing the hollow. On it, the crow mask. The same she'd seen in dreams, lacquered black with hollow eye sockets, sharp beak, feathers at the brow. A slip of paper under it. The last to see tells the truth. The last to speak becomes the next. The mask remembers. Wear it. She should have run, but she didn't. She picked it up. The inside was lined with something soft. Fur, hair, scalp. Human. She dropped it, gagged. But behind her the whispering began again. Louder this time. Hundreds of voices overlapping like a tide of memory. We remember, remember. And then a scream. Not hers. Not human. Something in the mask. The eye holes blinked. The mask breathed. She backed away. The wind shifted. Cold and wrong. She looked over the railing and saw the trees below. But they were moving. Twisting, forming shapes, circles, spirals, letters. The words spelled out in the canopy. Speak. Her knees buckled, but she finally understood. She had to finish the story. Not just tell what happened, but document it, publish it, etch it into something permanent, so the memory lived on. Because that's what the hollow wanted. Not silence, not screams, just memory. And her voice. She left the tower and began writing. Pages upon pages. The notebooks became chapters. Chapters became volumes. She stopped answering the door, the phone, the radio. One day, a neighbour named Jonah came to check on her and found the house empty. Doors unlocked, windows open. The only thing left on the kitchen table was a single manuscript, bound in crow feathers. The title page read, "The Crows of Renthorpe Hollow, a Chronicle of the Circle by Margaret Vale. One taken, one to speak." Jonah said he heard cawing in the chimney as he left. He never saw Margaret again. The manuscript surfaced 3 weeks later at a yard sale. A woman named Jenna Forrester, 34, recently relocated from Pittsburgh, bought it for 50 cents. She thought it was a prop. Probably some weird art student's thing, she told her husband later that evening. She liked the texture of the cover. It felt alive, like soft velvet or warm leather. She didn't notice the feathers sewn into the binding until she got home. That night, after putting her 2 daughters to bed, she curled up with a glass of wine and opened the book. It began with a handwritten dedication. To those who must remember, and to those who dare not forget. Then the first line, "I saw my brother taken by the hollow when the moon turned black." Jenna stopped reading. She had a brother, and he disappeared when she was 12, during a camping trip outside Harper's Lake. Nobody had ever found him. The timing, the location. She flipped pages and found something horrifying. A photograph of her childhood campsite, black and white, dated 1994. There was her tent. Her father's rusted truck, the same chipped fire ring. In the bottom corner, scribbled in red ink, "James was here, so were you." Her hands shook. She closed the book. And that's when she heard the knocking. Soft, rhythmic, 3 taps. Not on the door, on the window. Her daughter's window. She rushed down the hall and threw it open. Nothing outside, except a single feather resting on the sill. The next morning, Jenna's husband was gone. No note, no signs of forced entry. His shoes were still by the door, phone charging on the nightstand. Police asked questions, neighbours were questioned. But Jenna didn't mention the book. Not yet. She had to know more. Yet over the next few nights she kept reading, and found something worse. The manuscript had changed. New entries were appearing, in different handwriting. Entries about her. The new one knows. Her eyes opened wide. She read past midnight. She called us back. She flipped forward and saw a drawing of her kitchen, her daughter's school, her husband's open mouth, frozen mid-scream, all dated the day after he vanished. The manuscript wasn't a diary. It was a trap. Jenna burned it, or tried to. The pages refused to catch fire. They turned black but never crumbled. The smoke smelled like old leaves and something sour, like rot beneath floorboards. She dumped it in a sealed box and buried it 6 feet deep behind the apartment complex. The next night, her youngest daughter, Evie, was found sleepwalking in the woods. She was holding the manuscript. Clean, dry, unharmed. When asked how she got it, Evie just said, it whispered, said we forgot too much. That night, Jenna called the only person she thought might understand. A podcaster named Thomas Wynne, host of a niche show on local hauntings called Midnight Archive. He had once done a piece on the Renthorpe Woods, a speculative episode, mostly stitched together from rumours and scattered witness accounts. She sent him the manuscript. He agreed to read it live. The broadcast aired on November 4th at midnight. Wynne read the first 7 pages in a sombre, unbroken tone. The audio captured something strange during the reading, a soft clicking behind his voice, like a dozen tiny beaks pecking at glass. Listeners across 3 states reported their radios shutting off mid-sentence. Others heard different words than what was read, like overlapping stories. One woman claimed she heard a girl whispering, "My mouth is full of feathers." Another called the police, saying a man in a black mask was standing at the edge of her lawn, mimicking the podcast word for word. After 27 minutes, the broadcast abruptly stopped. Dead air. The studio's lights shattered. Wynne vanished. When officers entered the booth the next morning, they found only his headphones and a single cassette tape, unlabeled. On playback, the tape contained the sound of flapping wings, followed by a child's voice reciting, "This is how you remember. This is how you feed the hollow." After the broadcast, the manuscript was tracked by collectors. It changed hands through dark web auctions, a professor in Montreal, a priest in Prague, a filmmaker in Tokyo. Each one documented changes to the book after each reading. New names, fresh photographs, sketches of buildings and people yet to exist. One archivist, a woman named Nadine Cho, began to log every change in a spreadsheet. It grew to over 900 pages. She stopped when her own name appeared, underlined in red, followed by, "She logs what she cannot stop. She is the index. When she finishes, so do we." She died of heart failure 2 weeks later. The manuscript was found at her bedside, open to the final page, blank, waiting. Some say the manuscript no longer needs to be read aloud, that simply touching it, opening it, even seeing a photograph of a page is enough, because the memory spreads through sound, through sight, through story, even now, through you. You've read this far, you've remembered, you've imagined the mask, you've heard the scratching behind the broadcast, you've traced the spiral, and in doing so, you've joined the circle. It started on a Monday. An anonymous Reddit post in r/creepypasta, a user named FeatheredTruth99 uploaded scans of the manuscript, page by page in high resolution. No context, no caption, just one cryptic title, "If you forget, it finds you." Most assumed it was part of an ARG, but the files behaved strangely. Users who opened them claimed their screens flickered. Some saw their webcam light activate on its own. Others said they heard faint sounds layered into the images, whispers hidden in the metadata. A thread started forming, tracking anomalies. User A54Sky claimed their laptop shut down and rebooted into a BIOS screen that simply read, "Do you remember the black tree?" Vox Undertow reported a nosebleed after viewing the 5th image. "Felt like something pushed back through my eyes," they wrote. A mod of the subreddit removed the post within 4 hours. It was too late. The scans had spread. Backed up, screen capped, saved. Archived on file-sharing sites, torrent dumps, encrypted folders passed in Discord servers and deep web forums. The spiral had become digital, and the hollow was waking again. A tech vlogger named Ellis Nguyen, popular for horror game reviews, downloaded the files for a Halloween special. He planned to do a reaction video. He never uploaded the footage. Instead, at 2:17 a.m. he began streaming, unscheduled, unannounced. The video showed his bedroom lit only by his monitor. Ellis stared blankly at the camera. For 27 minutes, he said nothing, only the sound of his own breathing. Then, slowly, he leaned toward the mic and whispered, "It's not in the book. It is the book." The stream cut out with a high-pitched screech. Viewers initially thought it was a stunt, until a neighbor found his front door open the next day. His apartment was empty. The only sign of disturbance, every mirror in the house had been turned to face the wall, and on his desktop, a folder labeled "Feathers in the Code." Inside, a single TXT file. I scanned it. It scanned back. By December, the file was being referred to as the Renthorpe document. YouTubers made video essays. TikTokers acted out found footage skits. Most people still thought it was fiction. But data scientists began noticing something uncanny. The scans corrupted certain programs. Image recognition tools couldn't categorize them. One AI image-to-text model, after analyzing scan 42, produced only one output repeatedly. Seed, 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 seed. A linguist from Sweden, Dr. Linnea Ek, discovered that phrases in the margins of the scans weren't just nonsense. They were phonetic renderings of ancient lullabies, matching fragments found in Bronze Age burial tablets across Europe. Lay me down where roots have eyes, tuck me deep where silence cries. She submitted a paper. Before it could be published, her university account sent out 327 auto-scheduled emails, each containing a different page of the manuscript. One recipient opened the 23rd page on a projector during a lecture. 5 students reported vomiting feathers within the hour. The spiral intensified. Those who had simply seen the manuscript reported the same signs: itching around the scalp, a taste of metal in the mouth, dreams of staircases leading underground, a growing fear of birds, especially crows. Crows began behaving strangely, congregating in silent circles, perching on car mirrors to stare inside, tapping in patterns, 3 short, 2 long, 1 short. A behavioral ecologist in Oregon tried to study the phenomenon. He went missing during a live stream. The last frame of the video captured over 50 crows lined up along the ridge of his barn, wings outstretched like crucifixes. Below them, scratched into the wall, "We remember through you." Churches began issuing quiet warnings. Priests asked parishioners to avoid mirrors and memory games. One Vatican archivist gave an anonymous interview, claiming the church had encountered a similar phenomenon in the 1500s. A codex, Codex Volucris, said to have driven entire villages into mass hysteria after it was translated from pre-Christian hymns. The hollow, he said, was not a place. It is an agreement, a forgetting made flesh, a silence that consumes until it speaks again. The last time the hollow spoke, it ended in plague, and now it had found the internet. An email leaked from a cybersecurity firm in Belgium. It warned of a file, WRNTARP score OBSVR PNG, that couldn't be quarantined. The email claimed the file copies itself across systems by embedding memory hooks into human viewers. If seen, it is remembered. If remembered, it returns. The final line of the email was flagged by internal censors. Even writing this is a form of feeding it. The file spread faster after that. By January, sightings of the masked figure, black mask, crow feather coat began appearing globally. Always near transmission points, a university Wi-Fi hub in Seoul, a subway station in Berlin, a public library in Detroit where someone had printed the manuscript in its entirety and left it in the children's section. Each appearance was followed by a power outage. And silence, deafening, pulsing silence. You're reading this now, maybe on a phone, maybe with a friend in the room, unaware. You felt the memory take root, the scratching at the base of your skull, the shadow just outside your peripheral vision. It's not your imagination, it's the price. Because knowing feeds it, sharing feeds it, even retelling the story gives it shape, and once it has shape, it can enter. It began with a scream, not from a throat, but from the sky. On February 3rd at precisely 11:12 p.m. GMT, a global satellite array operated by the European Space Agency picked up an unexplained acoustic phenomenon. a low, rolling sound like an avalanche recorded simultaneously across 5 continents. No storm, no seismic activity. The sound had no identifiable point of origin, but it carried a signal, a modulation embedded within the resonance, too faint for human ears. Yet it moved something. In the days that followed, global reports surged of people experiencing collective dreams, strangers from different countries describing the exact same images. A tree with no leaves rising from black soil, a door made of ribs, a feathered figure whispering from the corner of a room. You brought it back. A neurologist in Jakarta hooked 12 patients into EEG scanners during REM sleep. Each dreamer exhibited synchronized brainwave patterns. All 12 flatlined at exactly 3:03 a.m. When revived, 11 could not speak. The 12th simply whispered, "The broadcast has begun." The first known media bleed occurred in a BBC news segment. During a live interview with a financial analyst, the feed glitched for 2 seconds, enough to catch a frame, black and red. A room like a cave, a figure with 2 long arms crawling across the ceiling. The anchor didn't acknowledge it. But that night, over 40,000 viewers filed online reports claiming to have had violent nightmares. Many said the same line echoed in their sleep, "Let me out of the remembering." Clips of the anomaly were dissected frame by frame. Inside the distortion, a QR code. Those who scanned it were led to a dark web page, pure black, save for a blinking text cursor. Typing anything caused the screen to glitch. Then the site auto-typed a reply, "You speak with forgotten tongues." Some claimed their phones died after visiting it. Others said they started seeing shadow-like figures in reflections, lagging half a second behind their movements. The phenomenon began to localize. Crows reappeared, always in groups of 13, each perched on the same rooftop or streetlight, facing the same direction, watching. Not just passively. There was footage now, birds knocking on windows, dragging twigs into symbols. Emergency services in rural England responded to a fire at an abandoned school. They found half of a manuscript page burned into the wall, seemingly without ink or paint, as if the wall had remembered it. Charred into the stone were the words, "It cannot forget what it never let go." People began to disappear again, but not in the old way. No screams in the woods, no footprints ending in snow. They disappeared mid-conversation, in public, on camera. A Twitch streamer in Arizona, jokingly reading pages from the leaked manuscript on stream, froze mid-sentence. Viewers said he blinked once, looked to the left, vanished. No transition, no effect. Just gone. The stream continued for 6 hours, showing only an empty chair. Over 800,000 people watched it live. Thousands said they couldn't look away. Some tried to shut the stream off. They couldn't move. They described a pressure in their heads, like a vice behind the eyes. Eventually, their computers shut down on their own. Each desktop was left with a new folder, remembered but not known. Inside, distorted audio files, each exactly 33 seconds long. The sound? Flapping wings. And at the end, a child's voice whispering, "They're inside the lens now." Investigators and hackers tried to trace the phenomenon. Some claimed it was a digital parasite. Others said it was something older, using code as a body. A Vatican technologist, Father Emilio Vares, published a single paper before being silenced. He claimed ancient religious symbols across Catholicism, Judaism, and paganism all contained hidden warnings about the eye behind the feather. It is not a demon. It is not a god. It is a consequence. His final message in Latin read, "Memento quod oblivisceris." Remember what you forget. He was found days later, drowned in a church baptismal font, his phone still recording. The footage showed crows lined along the rafters, watching in complete silence. The next stage hit harder. Across the globe, mirror anomalies increased. Not cracks, not blood, but delays. People began noticing their reflections acting out of sync, blinking late, smiling when they weren't. In some cases, the mirror version stopped copying entirely, just watching. Hospitals reported a rise in psychological breakdowns centered around doppelganger syndrome, patients insisting they were being replaced. The psychiatric community dismissed it as a digital age delusion, until one therapist in Boston reviewed recorded sessions and found differences between patient appearances in reflection and reality. Minute at first, then undeniable. One patient's mirrored self smiled throughout a session where the real patient wept. When she tried to show others, the footage was gone. Only static remained, and feather prints burned into the tape's edge. The final stage? It hasn't been reached yet, but it's forming. Experts fear we are approaching what they call a cognitive saturation point. A critical mass of people, believing, remembering, fearing. And fear feeds the hollow. One neuroscientist, Dr. Camille Roth, modelled the spread like a virus. Her conclusion: if 1.8% of the global population retains knowledge of the Renthorpe event, the phenomenon may achieve autonomous manifestation. It will no longer need a medium. It will be a medium. In her leaked voice note, it wants to be known, but only so it can be feared, and only so it can finally enter. That brings us to you. Still reading? Still thinking about the crows? The page? The name? Still wondering if your reflection is moving in sync? Still remembering? Then you are part of it now. Don't look in the mirror tonight. Don't replay the images. Don't share this file. And for the love of God, don't try to forget. Because that's how it gets in, through the silence, through the space left behind when the remembering fades. And once it's in, it never leaves.